We can play it at the same time frame, the same speed that the experiment itself is played. And so lend me your ears, and I'll premiere for you meine kleine brain music. This is mine, and this is at the real time. This would take 9 minutes if we were to listen to the whole thing. This is a lot of data. It takes a minute to come up so that we can follow the bouncing ball. Easy listening. And it would take a while for us to listen to the whole thing, especially if your children are forced to listen at the same time. So in order for us to hear better the dynamics of all of this brain activity going on simultaneously, we can speed it up a little bit. So now we speed it to 6 times real time. And at this point, if we listen long enough, we'd begin to hear transitions within the piece. But finally, we'll speed it up to 12 times. And now a 9-minute experiment takes 40 seconds. And so we can actually, without too much stretching our attention span, listen to the whole thing. To this very track in a minute. I'm going to point out a few other ways in which we can begin to isolate some of the patterns of activity here that we're listening to over time. I can take the top 6 components, that is the areas of the brain which are most active from moment to moment, and filter out all the rest, all the less active. In other words, taking just the forte parts here and render it as a sextet. Or I can take the top 2, the duet. And finally, the solo part. This would be the component from moment to moment, which is the most active, where the most activity of the brain is centered. And we'll listen to just a part of this. The effect of this is, in a way, a guide to what to listen for in the whole thing, one that plays all the components at once. And now we can notice a couple of things about the overall dynamic picture of the brain in action in this experiment in one subject. Among other things, that there are continuities, that there are at all times some components which are on in a relatively, not quite a steady state, but relatively close to it. But at the same time, there's always dynamism, there's always change among them. One would be, okay, you can hear both of those. The other thing, another thing that we can observe, is that it would be oversimple to make any claims about the functional job of any one of these components. It looks, for example, like this component is particularly active during the observe and fixate conditions, but look here, it comes back again, but not at all. It's in the drive condition. So any generalizations about this would be difficult to make. Or up here, these components seem all involved in, especially involved in the driving part of the experiment when you're in control of the virtual car, and yet those are not all on together. They're rapidly oscillating among each other. We also notice that change makes a difference, that when there's a crossing of a boundary from one condition to another, there's usually a blast of component activity. And that we hear that as we go through that, and occasional other pileups of components as we go through. And so there's a lot of dynamic activity in this, and now we're able, by listening to it, to begin to identify some of those things. So what we've done here is to move from an effort to visualize something which is very complex in time to render it into sound. Sonification is a word that is frequently used for that. And so now I have to make my obligatory Shakespeare quote. This is a bit of a stretch, but I'll explain why in a minute. Dark night, that from the eye his function takes, the ear more quick of apprehension makes, wherein it doth impair the seeing sense, it pays the hearing double recompense. In the dark, as in Midsummer Night's Dream, hearing is made acute, and I will take this opportunity to mention the dream is being produced right now at Hartford Stage, and it's a wonderful presentation. Okay, more prosaically, in this musical version, in particular, sonification, in things like melody and rhythm, we're able to hear sequencing of operations over time in the brain, and regularity and repetition, cyclical operations passed among different independent components over time. In harmony and in the key and the mode, which I do believe shifted at different points in the experiment, in this case, we're able to hear the effects of broadly distributed activity in which many components are involved at once. And indeed, ultimately, that global states can oscillate, that the overall condition oscillates in and out of those. And we hear all of their interaction. Now, rather than follow along this path any further with the driving experiment,